Oh, thank God. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is James Gunn's final outing with this lovable band of a-holes. The Guardians movies have been some of Marvel's best, thanks in part to their sharp wit, stunning visuals, seamless blend of heart and humor, and a stellar cast that turned a group of characters no one had ever heard of into household names. So, when it was announced that this was going to be Gunn's last movie with Marvel before he goes to hopefully fix the sinking ship that is DC, there was a lot of expectations and concern. I mean, the trailers looked promising, but I think the combination of several lackluster MCU projects in a row, mixed with the superhero fatigue getting stronger and stronger, kind of floundered our hype a little bit. Me personally, I was nervous as fuck for this movie. I had total faith in Gunn that he would kill it, but there was still a part of my brain that was like, can Marvel ruin James Gunn too? Well, you can all breathe a sigh of relief, because while it has its issues, I'm happy to report that Guardians 3 is fucking fantastic. Next to No Way Home, this is probably my favorite thing to come out of Marvel in the past couple years. Before we get into the good, let me real quickly talk about what I didn't like. Firstly, Adam Warlock. Not necessarily his character or Will Poulter's performance, because I actually thought both of those were pretty solid. But with that said, he has no purpose in this movie. The teaser at the end of Volume 2 made me think he was going to have a bigger presence and role in this movie. But with everything they wanted to do with this final chapter, it felt like they kind of forgot to write him in, so he's just kind of there. Even his intro is really rushed. He just flies in out of nowhere into nowhere and wrecks the entire team. Like I said, I thought that Will Poulter did a good job, and I'd like to see more of him, just not the best intro. My other major complaint is that this movie gets kinda cheap with the amount of times it teases character deaths. With this being the final one, and especially with how subliminal the marketing has been, we all were under the impression that a few of these characters were gonna go. But every time it looks like they might not make it, something happens at the very last second to save them, and then they all just go off on their merry way unharmed. Now, my girlfriend argued that characters don't need to die to have their story arcs be final, and to an extent, I agree. And I actually do like where all the characters ended up by the end. I just didn't really like the fake outs. With that said, what I loved about this movie is everything else. I love the little glimpses into Rocket's backstory. They do it Deadpool style, where they'll cut away briefly from the story to have a flashback, and much like Deadpool, it feels really fluid and natural, not to mention fucking heartbreaking. Rocket has always been a very closed-off character, but we started to see his vulnerable side more in Volume 2. Now seeing the environment he grew up in being physically and emotionally tortured by the High Evolutionary, and the trauma that he faced trying to save his new friends only for them to be snuffed out like it was nothing, this is some heavy shit. We also continue with the thread set up in Endgame with Peter and Gamora. At first I was kind of worried that the whole will they won't they subplot was going to get annoying, but I actually thought they handled it well. Peter learning to move on and Gamora learning compassion and heroism was nice to see, and I'm glad they didn't try to force them back together at the end. On top of this, the villain in this movie was really good too. Not as good as Ego in terms of emotional investment, but just the threat of him and how he justifies torturing innocent creatures to create the perfect society is really gripping. While this is definitely a heavier Guardians movie, it doesn't skimp out on the things you're used to. The comedy is still funny while not being overbearing. The performances across the board were fantastic. The Awesome Mix 3 soundtrack is full of bangers. Take that, Mario movie. Now you have the second best use of No Sleep Till Brooklyn in a movie this year. And both featuring Chris Pratt, now that I think about it. And of course, it being a James Gunn movie, the action and visuals look spectacular. My last few videos on Marvel have been really dour and negative, so I was really banking on this movie being the saving grace, and it absolutely delivered. It does kind of suck that this is the end, and we might never see James Gunn working with Marvel or the Guardians franchise again, but on the plus side, this means the next few years of DC are going to be amazing. All I can say is thank you to James Gunn and the entire casting crew for not only introducing the world to these D-list misfits, but for making a satisfying ending that sends them off on a high. Check this movie out if you want, and I'd give it a 4.5 out of 5.